Hello, everyone. My name is Azim Khan. I'm a story scholar with the 1947 Partition Archive and a South Asian Studies lecturer. Welcome to the 75 Days of Partition series. This is day 68 of hosting esteemed guests for this series, which will continue till August 17th. Today, we will be speaking to Dr. Madhumita Saha. Let me start by giving a brief bio. Dr. Dr. Saha teaches modern Indian history at Amity University, Noida, Uttar Pradesh. She has studied in the USA as a Fulbright doctoral fellow and taught there for several years before returning to India. She writes about the political, economic, and environmental history of India with a particular focus on the history of science and technology. She has won several national and international grants, including from the Indian Council of Historical Research and the Indian National Science Academy. Her book on the history of the Green Revolution is under contract with the Cambridge University Press. Dr. Saha is the granddaughter of a refugee couple who migrated from East Pakistan with four kids but lost two on the way to India. All her life, she heard from her grandparents the most heart wrenching stories of a home long lost. Today, she sits down to share some of the stories she grew up with. Welcome, Dr. Saha. How are you?
Thank you, Azim. I'm fine. I hope you're fine too.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Let's get straight into the questions. As we saw from your bio, you grew up hearing the partition stories from your grandparents. Would you please tell us what their background was, where they migrated from, and the general partition journey?
Yes. So, see, when I was very young, so I would hear my grandparents refer to Bangladesh as their desh, country, and India was always India. Okay, India was never the desh, never the country. So, as a kid, you were bound to be some kind of patriotic. So it would really make me very angry. Why are they referring to India as India and Bangladesh, a foreign country, as their desh? Okay, so and another thing, they had a huge metal sword. Okay, and they were always keeping it away from us, behind the huge wooden cupboards we had. Okay, so I would always ask them that why do we have this sword? What is the purpose of this sword? But I never got the answer till I was like 12, 13 years old. Then I got to hear the gory story behind it. Okay, so the story that I'm going to hear from them was they lived, the entire family lived in a place called Narayanganj, okay, close to Dhaka. If you look at the Google map now, you will find that Narayanganj is actually very close to Dhaka. And like we grew up hearing about Ganga, River Ganges, and Jamuna, and Godavari, and Krishna. They would always talk about Padma and Meghna, how awesome the rivers were. They would talk about the Meghna River having waves, okay? So, and they would talk about Hilsha. They would have Hilsha in Kolkata. It's the most delicious fish that Bengalis have. And they would say, see, this is my grandparents in their 60s, but they left East Pakistan in 1947, and I'm telling this was in 1980, okay, when I was very, very young. So they would always say, none of the vegetables nor the fish taste like the ones you would get from the Meghna River. So they were a business family. My grandfather owned shops there, and land also. So they were kind of clueless as to what was about to happen, okay, till the very last moment. Now, I would always find that very, very surprising until and unless when I grew up and started studying partition in detail. It has to do with the fact that if you are rich, if you are well off, if you are well connected, okay, you got the best information, okay, you had the best chance to leave the country before everybody else. You would use your privilege, you would use your money, contacts to get out. But my grandparents were not exactly into that upper middle class, okay, they were middle class. And because they had land and because they had shops, and they had nothing in West Bengal, okay, nothing in Calcutta, an alternative means of livelihood in Calcutta. They wanted to stay there in East Bengal as long as possible with 4 kids and the full family. They were in a very they were very anxious that where would the next meal come from. I mean, apart from the little savings that they had, they are leaving behind the land, they are leaving behind the shops, everything. Okay, so they waited till the last moment. Okay, when attacks started. Now, this sword I was talking about was when there was this fear that the attacks could come at night, and these people had no weapons, nothing. So what they did was they went to the local metal smith and just made out of iron, polished the iron, made sharpened it at one side of it, and made a sword kind of thing. They would keep it by their side at night when they sleep, in case the attack happened. Okay, now, and also they would keep water boiling the whole night, and lot of glass bottles. Okay, so because that was their primary line of defense, they would pour in the boiling water if there was an attack, and they would throw it on the attackers, like scaring them away. Like, I cannot even imagine that my grandparents would use sword to kill anybody. It is so terrifying an idea. So I think their best bet was those hot water bottles. So then, in East Bengal, unlike in Punjab, the violence was long drawn. The violence was low key, but the violence never stopped. Every day, it went on, and the news would pour in. So a time came when they realized that they have to move. And they moved without selling the shops. They moved without selling the land. Okay, I have seen utensils that they brought in from East Pakistan, those utensils. And my grandmother told me this story. So they reached the nearest railway station, okay, to board the train to Shialda station in Kolkata. Okay, now my grandfather could not accompany them. He wanted to come few days later, after arranging. Maybe he was still thinking that he would be able to arrange something, get some amount of money after selling the shop. So what happened is he accompanied my grandmother along with the 4 kids to the railway station. Okay, the train that came, it was packed. It was so packed that they could not get in. Okay, they could not manage to get in. So my grandmother used to tell that she started howling at the station, thinking that they have to stay back now and they would be dead. Okay, but luckily, by next day, another train came and they boarded it to reach Sialda station. And when they reached Sialda station, they heard the first train was stopped on the way and the passengers were massacred. Okay, so every time she told me that story. And see, this if you have any idea, people, this business agricultural community in East Bengal, they are Vaishnavas. That is, they are devotees of Lord Krishna. Okay, so they call Krishna as Gopal. That is the little boy. They worship the little boy form of Krishna, Gopal. Okay, so they, water or tear would stream down, and she would say, "That day Gopal saved us. That day Gopal saved us." So still I get very emotional, I get choked when I have often, like, I teach partition history in my class also. I'm try to be, I try to remain very, very objective, like a historian, as a history teacher, but it still gives me a lot of goosebumps, like remembering her emotions. It makes me emotional. So they reached, but as I said, they had no anchorage in Kolkata. So they did not have relatives in whose house they could stay for a few days, okay, before finding their own homes and all that. And so they stayed at Shialda station itself. Okay, now, and the government would open langar khana. I do not know whether that word makes sense to our audience. Langar khana means, they would just give out khichdi and dry murmura, that kind of thing, dry food or khichdi in lunch. So they were eating that, but the main problem was water. So, and they had my father, who was the youngest, was 2 years old, okay, and others would be 2 years to 3 years age difference in all four. So they also drank the water from Shialda station, and so after a week or maybe 4 days, I don't remember now exactly, when they did find a place and moved in, then my uncle and my aunt, okay, that is brother and sister of my father, they suffered from terrible dysentery, and they died. They died from that. And my grandparents always they believed that this dysentery took place because of the water they drank at the railway station. So you see, Azim, we talk about casualties of partitions, okay, and we talk about rape. We talk about, how people were gunned down, how people were cut into pieces. But the casualties of partition is much, much more than that. There was unaccountable number of people who died from this kind of thing, and because they died from dysentery, nobody would record them as partition casualty, but they are partition casualties. And the story of struggle would continue for a very long time, very, very long time. See, this people are middle class people. They had their own homes, own houses, land, shops. But when they came to Calcutta, they had to start living in not proper houses, but what we call the basti area. That is, makeshift homes were made on occupied lands. Okay, now I have been to that home. I have been to that home when I was in high school, when I was in college. My father never ever hide from us the fact that what was his childhood like that. Okay, and this, even then, see, so many years after the partition, these houses still stand with tin roofs, because according to the municipal acts, if the land is not in your name, you cannot build a house with pakka roof. Okay, it has to be a makeshift roof of tin. So he took us into that home to show that in tin roofed house, an asbestos roofed house, they stayed. And we always talk about this Hindu Muslim violence, which was partition. Violence takes so many form. Like Calcutta was this, second to London. They used to call Calcutta. It was clean. It was very it is city of palaces. Okay. Now suddenly this a few million refugees move in, and none of this West Bengal people. And see, because my mother is a West Bengal, somebody whose family was in West Bengal. So it is only from my father's side that I am a grandchild of a refugee couple, but not my mother's side. Okay, so do not think that I am biased against people in West Bengal. Half of me is West Bengal. But I have also heard this from my maternal grandmother, how scared they were to rent out any rooms to these refugees, because one, the language was very different, and this people of West Bengal thought East Bengalis are loud. Okay, and they came with no money, so it was no guarantee that they could give rent. Okay, and they came with big families. Okay, so it was not anymore my grandfather, grandmother and their children. So initial years, they told me they would all live together, all the uncles, all the aunts in 2-3 rooms. And that was not something that was welcomed. They did not want that to happen. So what happened was they were forced to take up this vacant land in Kolkata and make makeshift houses and move in. But what happens is, when you make makeshift house, that means municipality does not give you electricity. It means municipality does not give you water. So where do you get your electricity from? There are electricity poles, the street lights. Okay, so they would hook electricity from there. Okay, one fan, one light. One fan, one light. Okay, and water, they would stand in line to get it from the tube wells or local tap. So they would carry the buckets, filled it up with water in the morning, and bring it. So that was the quota of water for the day. Okay, so my father got a good, he got job in bank. He did very well. He married my mother, who was a central government employee. So I led a very comfortable life. I went to study in Loreto, which is a Irish Catholic proper convent school. Okay, so my life was very different, but I never allowed myself to forget, and they also kept on, wherever needed, telling these stories to us, sometimes with intense pain, sometimes with very casually. Okay, I will give you an example to you. I don't waste food. Okay, sometimes to the point of, even if I find it go a little bad also, I will just eat it. Okay, instead of throwing it away. Now this might sound horrendous to many of the listeners, but this is because I would see my grandfather. Okay, they would eat rice. Okay, so the Bengali thing is, on the plate you will take little bit of salt at the corner of the plate. Okay, you would keep it in case the curry is little bit less in salt, or the dal is little bit less in salt. You will take it from there. So sometimes so happen that few pieces of rice would get mixed with the salt. Okay, I have seen my grandfather and my father take out from that salt that 1, 2, 3 pieces of rice that might have got mixed and eat it. So, they never told me explicitly why they did that, but I now know why they did that. So food was that precious. It became that precious in their life. So they grew the habit of not even wasting even few grains of rice. So, so I told a lot about the journey, but I think the journey doesn't complete when you take a train and come from East Bengal to West Bengal. The journey is longer than that, and the journey is transgenerational. You carry in different aspect, not the same way, but you carry, if you wish, if you want, a part of the journey I carry with me still. So my first foreign visit was not US. My first foreign visit was Bangladesh, and I can't even explain to you how I felt. Actually, you can take a bus from Kolkata and go to Dhaka, okay? But you have to stop at a place where the border is, and you have to walk and cross the checkpoint. So crossing that checkpoint was so memorable. It was more emotional than me landing at San Francisco airport when I did 1 year later. So 1 year before I went to the US, I went actually to Bangladesh. So yeah, so it was like a circle completing for me. Yes.
Yeah, I think everything you've told us, that's such a fascinating story you've told us about all the memories that your grandparents kept with them. And I see so many similarities in the interviews in Punjab that I have done. For example, the women defending themselves with the hot oil and giving para at night. I've heard these stories, and especially um, from when you grow up, like you said, with a very nationalistic education system, and you think like partition, everyone was desperate for partition, but so many of
Mm,
these stories, like you said, people just until the very last moment, until they felt their lives were completely at risk, they just weren't willing to leave. And
mm,
growing up, you think, well, of course, everyone wanted Pakistan. Pakistan is everything. All my
mm,
grandparents were desperate to the um, leave India, but it turns out like you interview partition survivors, and they just were very attached to their land, to the societies
absolutely.
that they lived in, and
Mm,
societies that contained people of all religions and
mm,
castes. And I mean,
mm,
of course, it was more complex than that, but
mm.
it's very fascinating. And I would just like to ask you, did you, when did your, if and when did your grandparents go back to East Bengal?
They never did. They never did. They never did. Not even my father. I tried to convince him. See, when I went to Bangladesh, I was invited by a university there to speak. Okay, so it was fully funded and everything, and we traveled a lot. So, like, if you are in India, if you are going to Tamil Nadu, you are traveling much farther than if you are going to Dhaka. Dhaka is next door. It will in 5 6 hours you will reach Dhaka in a bus. Okay, and if you want to go to Tamil Nadu, it will take you 36 to 48 hours in train. Okay, I have tried to convince him so many times that my father, that please let's go. I he showed no interest, but I think that is not actually the thing. It was not that he was not interested. I think he was too traumatized to go back, and I think uh, for me it was kind of romantic. You see, I romanticized my belongingness. I have many Bangladeshi friends, and I absolutely adore them. Uh, but I think I'm kind of romantic about Bangladesh. But my father could not afford to be romantic about Bangladesh. It was too raw. It was too close to his skin, and um, it completely took away his childhood from him, because with two kids lost, it was him and his elder brother, and my elder uncle was not as sharp as my father was. Okay, so, and another thing happened. See, again I'm talking about casualty of partition. Because of lack of nutrition, my grandfather developed what is known as bone tuberculosis, okay, bone TB, because of lack of proper nutrition. Okay, now very early in his life, for my father, it became imperative that he continued to study, do well in his studies. Thank goodness he was good in science. Okay, and he did not have a privilege like me to study history. Okay, so thank goodness he was good in science. So he was studying, and he was earning. He told me that when he was in BSc third year, he would teach students of BSc first year. Okay, because higher the class you teach, more money you can get from giving this private tuition. So BSc third year student in chemistry teaching BSc first year student chemistry. Okay, so he was kind of robbed of his childhood because he had to earn, and education was never fun. It was an absolute necessity. So like I chose history because I wanted to do history. I wanted to do research. I could afford to do my research under Indian and American scholarship because I had no financial obligation. I had to earn no means for my parents or for my sister or brother or anybody. It was me. Okay. But so I think it was very raw for him. It would have brought back memories for him, which he didn't want to encounter. I think that's why he was never interested. And then he died at the age of 61 also. So I never got the chance to persuade him more after his retirement. So he died a few months after his retirement. So yeah.
Yeah, it's very instructive how you said how the role of memory and loss the role it can play in how you shape your identity and not want to go back. For example, just last night, I was talking to my mother about our ancestral home in Jalandhar. So she'd been there about 10 years ago with a large group of our family, like about a dozen or so people. And she said the same thing. For example, so for her generation, it was very romantic, like it was for you. They were seeing all the houses that the family used to live in, the extended family in the bastis of Jalandhar, and for them it was very romantic. But she said one of their elder cousins, who was like a teenager when partition happened, he would sometimes not leave, and he would sometimes, it was like you said, it was too raw and emotional for him, and he sometimes broke down because everything came flooding back to them. And on that same note, you mentioned that your grandparents always felt more Bangladeshi than Indian. So did it change over time, or did it persist like that? And after that, what was your father's perspective like, and what was your perspective like?
Okay, so they never use the word Bangladeshis. They would say Desh Narayanganj. So they did not refer to the country. They referred to their town. They refer to their village. Okay, because the idea of a country became post 1947. Like you are an Indian. Like that feeling is post 1947 when the identity of the nation state and citizenship and all that. Before that, it is always about village, the village that you came from. Okay, that is your abode. You came to the city. So like a Bengali would say bari. Okay, ghar, that is home, is village. The house that you have in the city, okay, is basha. Basha means nest. Nest, like a bird's nest. Okay, it's temporary. It is not permanent. Okay, so they always refer not themselves to as a Bangladeshi, but as Bangal, and then Narayanganj. For my father, it's India. It's India. So somehow, my father made a very clean break with the past. Okay. For me also, as I said, I'm an Indian without a question, but I am very, very, I get very fond when I meet a Bangladeshi. Okay. So big, and it feels like that they are also my countrymen. It doesn't matter that the country is divided. Okay. They are us. They are us, and we are them. So that kind of feeling I have. But I doubt whether my father had that feeling. I never asked him, what are your feelings about Bangladesh? I never asked him. I should have. But yeah.
Okay, so finally, you mentioned that you teach partition history in college as
Yeah.
well. Please tell us more about that.
Oh, absolutely. I teach the history of partition, the politics, and also the rehabilitation. So you see, I teach in Noida. So I have a lot of Punjabi students, Sindhi students. I mean, not Sindhi means ancestors from Sindh, mostly from Punjab. Okay, so so to them, it is partition is something that they have heard about from their parents, but um, they always try to when they start their approach is, oh, that is something that has happened 75 years ago, whatever years ago. But I there that happens, you can share something that happened to and it is you. Then I think their responses I found is fabulous. They and they're curious and they want to find out more. So could you hear me, Azim, for the last few minutes? Or was I gone? I cannot hear you.
You were a little choppy for a bit,
Oh, yeah.
but now it's okay. Would you please repeat?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So the thing was like, so when I wrap open, like when we discuss in threadbare what the partition means, not at the political as a political event, but more on a personal scale, then they reciprocate. Okay. Then they understand, particularly the gender aspect of partition moves them a lot. Okay. And recently I have seen also the class aspect. They are not so much interested about the Hindu Muslim story. No. And thankfully, no. Okay. Because they have learned to see partition from other angle. And how new colonies came up, how cities became reoriented, all that stories interest them more, the psychological impact. And my students have been working with partitionarchive.org for last 2-3 years now, and they're doing very, very well. And they are very excited to be part of this endeavor. Again, we also conduct partition symposium. We did it last year, invited scholars from all over the world. So partition is a very much studied and discussed topic in Amity History Department, and students take a lot of interest in it. The personal story, the human side of it, they take deep interest. Not so much the political thing. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, and that's the pull of the Partition Archive for me personally as well. That instead of the political narratives and the state narratives, they delve into the deeply personal stories that people who lived through partition actually went through, and I think that's so valuable and it's more interesting. Frankly, I was always bored, like you said. As a student, I had no interest in partition. 14 points, Jinnah's 14 points, Nehru said this, Jinnah said this. After a while, it becomes very boring.
Yes, we studied partition that way. We studied partition that way, and I'm grateful it is changing because of some of the work that Partition Archive is doing, and also others. There are very fine works going on, and it is contributing to the cause, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll wrap up here since we've reached the end of our time. And thank you so much, Dr. Saha. That was such a fascinating interview. It felt like just another of our interviews that we do with partition survivors, getting to hear the story of our grandparents and the wonderful anecdotes you related to us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Azim. It was such a pleasure talking to you. And I look forward to reading and being more involved with partitionarchive.org. Okay, absolutely a pleasure. Yes.
Yeah, the pleasure is all ours. Thank you so much. And for those who are joining us, please tune in next week for another amazing conversation with Somalia Mukhopadhyay. The 1947 Partition Archive is hosting this series to commemorate 75 years of partition. This series is a daily micro podcast series being aired for 75 days between June 3rd and August 17th, except for Sundays, to commemorate the 75th anniversary of partition in 2022. For context, August 17th is the day the Boundary Commission announced the Radcliffe Line separating India and Pakistan, 75 days after the Partition Plan was announced on June 3rd, 1947. Thank you very much again, and please show us your love and support by sending the hearts and like emojis under the video. For any query, DM us on social media or connect with any of our team members. Thank you very much.